You know that feeling when your body is still but your mind won't stop moving? When you lie awake at night replaying every conversation, every choice, every what if? That's where this story begins. Not in chaos, but in quiet exhaustion. The kind that creeps in when your thoughts never take a day off. Aram looked like he had everything together. A decent job, a polite smile, the kind of person people call stable. But behind closed doors, his thoughts never stopped talking. He'd replay moments from years ago, wishing he could edit them, fix them, make them right. And every time he did, peace drifted further away. Overthinking doesn't feel like madness. It feels like responsibility, as if by thinking more, you'll somehow prevent life from falling apart. But all it really does is drain the life out of living. At 2 a.m., Aram would stare at the city lights from his window, whispering, "Why can't I just stop thinking?" He didn't want silence. He wanted peace, but the more he tried to silence his thoughts, the louder they grew. That's the trick of overthinking. The harder you fight it, the stronger it gets. One innocent thought becomes a loop. What if I fail? What if they don't like me? What if I never get out of this? And suddenly your own mind feels like a storm you can't escape. Aram tried everything. Long walks, loud music, endless scrolling. But peace doesn't come through distraction. It grows from understanding. Each sleepless night was teaching him something about fear, control, and the illusion of certainty. One morning he caught his reflection in the mirror, tired eyes, quiet frustration. He whispered, "Why do I need to control everything?" That question hung in the air like a truth he had run from for years. Overthinking, he realized, is the mind's attempt to control what can't be controlled. We analyze, plan, and worry to protect ourselves from the unknown. But life doesn't respond to control. It responds to trust. And no amount of mental rehearsal can protect you from reality. That morning, Aram decided to do something new. He didn't check his phone. He didn't rush. He just sat as breathing. At first, the silence felt unbearable, like standing face to face with himself. But slowly, something softened. He saw that his thoughts were like clouds, passing, shifting, never permanent. For the first time in years, he felt a tiny bit of space between himself and his mind. A few days later, he went to a park. There he noticed an old man feeding birds. Calm eyes, slow hands, a presence that felt peaceful. The old man smiled and said, "You look like someone trying to win an argument with his own mind." Aram blinked. "How did you know?" The man chuckled. "Because I used to be you." Those words landed deeply. They talked for hours, not about philosophy, just life. At one point, the man said, "Your thoughts are like waves. You can't stop the sea, but you can learn to swim. The more you fight the current, the more it pulls you under," Aram asked quietly. "So how do I stop thinking so much?" The old man smiled. "You don't stop thinking, you stop believing everything you think." That single line felt like sunlight breaking through fog. It wasn't advice, it was freedom. That night, Aram wrote the words on a scrap of paper and taped it above his bed. You don't stop thinking. You stop believing everything you think. It became his mantra. Days passed. He practiced watching his thoughts instead of chasing them. When a memory came, he didn't fight it. He just noticed. When fear whispered, he didn't argue. He breathed. And slowly, he discovered that thoughts only control you when you take them personally. The problem was never the mind itself. It was identification, believing that every thought was true, that every worry was real. Most were just echoes, old fears dressed as logic. Aram began journaling, not to solve, but to release. Each page became a mirror where his mind emptied its noise, and with every word, the storm quieted. One morning, while sipping tea, he noticed the warmth of the cup in his hands, the rhythm of his breath, the sound of birds outside, small details he had ignored for years. Peace, he realized, wasn't waiting somewhere far away. It was here, hidden beneath the noise. That night he wrote another line in his journal. Peace begins when I stop mistaking my thoughts for truth. The next day, he went back to the same park. The old man wasn't there this time, just the bench, the wind, the hum of life. He sat quietly, remembering the conversation. The river nearby flowed steadily, carrying leaves and reflections. And in that flow, Arham saw a lesson. Maybe the goal isn't to still the water. Maybe it's to stop fearing its movement. He closed his eyes and whispered, "If I can't stop the current, maybe I can learn to float." For the first time, his mind didn't resist. The thoughts still came, soft, scattered, but they no longer held power. They were simply passing clouds over a vast, open sky, and in that quiet moment, he understood. Peace doesn't mean the absence of thought. It means not being owned by thought. Peace doesn't arrive like a lightning bolt. It comes quietly, through small realizations that change the way you see life. But to truly find peace, you must face what fuels the storm inside you. For Aram, that storm was made of one word: control. He had spent years trying to predict life, making sure nothing went wrong. No one misunderstood him. No failure ever caught him off guard. But life doesn't work that way. It doesn't bend to your control. It bends to your trust. One evening, Aram sat at his desk with his journal open. The same question kept circling in his head. What if it doesn't work out? He began writing down all his what-ifs. What if I fail? What if people don't understand me? What if I lose everything? What if I'm not enough? When he stopped, the page was full. He looked at it and realized not one of these fears had ever actually happened. They were ghosts, fictional futures that had stolen real hours of his life. He laughed softly. I've been fighting shadows. That's what overthinking is. The brain's clumsy way of trying to protect you from pain. It builds stories, creates scenarios, all to avoid uncertainty. But peace isn't born from certainty. It's born from acceptance, from allowing life to unfold, even when you don't have all the answers. Aram began to see something he'd missed all along. Peace isn't something you chase. It's what remains when you stop chasing everything else. That night, he dreamt of his younger self, sitting on a swing, laughing freely. The boy looked up and asked, "Why did you stop trusting life?" Aram woke up in tears. He couldn't remember the last time he'd just trusted, without analyzing, without preparing for disappointment. He realized how much energy he'd spent trying to avoid pain instead of learning to live through it. The next morning, he went for a walk. No headphones, no destination. Just him, the sound of birds, and the wind moving through trees. Every sound reminded him that life keeps flowing, with or without your permission, and he whispered to himself, Maybe peace isn't found when everything makes sense. Maybe it's found when I stop demanding that it should. That moment changed him. He began noticing how his brain convinced him that thinking more meant solving more. But he wasn't solving. He was spiraling. He'd take one worry and feed it until it grew into a storm. He'd replay mistakes not to learn, but to punish himself. One afternoon, he sat in a cafe, watching people rush by, eyes fixed on their phones, faces tense, lost in invisible worlds of worry. He thought, we're all prisoners of our thoughts, pretending we're free. Outside, rain began to fall. He watched the droplets roll down the window and felt something shift. Not everything needs to be understood. Some things are just meant to be experienced. That evening he wrote, "My thoughts are tools, not masters. I'll use them when needed and set them down when not." That one line became his quiet revolution. Letting go didn't mean giving up. It meant giving space for people to be human, for moments to unfold, for peace to enter. He began practicing what he called micro-letting go. Whenever he caught himself overthinking, he'd pause and ask, "Is this in my control right now?" If the answer was no, he'd take a deep breath and imagine releasing it, like exhaling a heavy stone from his chest. At first, it felt unnatural, but over time it became his second nature, and something beautiful happened. He started feeling lighter. He realized that overthinking wasn't about the problem. It was about his relationship with uncertainty. He was addicted to knowing, to predicting. But when he stopped needing to know, life started feeling softer. Weeks later, he returned to the park. The old man wasn't there, just the same bench and the same river flowing beside it. The water carried leaves and reflections of clouds, moving effortlessly forward. And Arham understood. Peace is like that river. It doesn't mean stillness. It means flow, he whispered. If I can't stop the current, I'll learn to float. For the first time, his thoughts didn't scare him. They still came, but now they were gentle visitors, not tyrants. That night, lying in bed, Aram noticed his mind wasn't silent, but it was kind. The thoughts were there, but softer, passing through like background music. Maybe the goal was never to stop thinking, he realized. Maybe it was to stop suffering from thinking. The next morning, he woke up feeling light. Not because life was easy, but because he'd stopped fighting reality. That's the quiet miracle of peace. It doesn't erase chaos. It transforms your relationship with it. Over the following weeks, Aram practiced awareness. When a thought appeared, he'd label it gently. Worrying, planning, remembering. That simple act created distance. He saw himself as the observer, not the noise, and in that distance, he discovered a truth. Awareness isn't something you build. It's something you remember. You've always been the awareness beneath the thoughts. You just forgot. One evening, while writing, he smiled and whispered, "I am not my thoughts. I am the space they move through." And in that single realization, he found a peace deeper than silence. A peace that comes not from escaping the mind, but from understanding it. Peace had begun to grow in Aram's life like morning light, soft, steady, almost unnoticed. He wasn't cured of overthinking, But something inside him had shifted. He was no longer a prisoner of his mind. He was its observer. Still, life has its way of testing what you've learned, and that test came sooner than he expected. One morning, Aram received news that his company was downsizing. His position, the one he'd built for years, was suddenly uncertain. His chest tightened. His thoughts raced back to old fears. What if I can't handle this? What if I lose everything again? For a moment the storm returned, familiar, heavy, overwhelming. But this time, he paused. He took a deep breath and remembered his mantra. You don't stop thinking. You stop believing everything you think. He sat quietly with the fear instead of running from it. He asked himself, what's actually happening right now? Not in my imagination, but in reality. The truth was simple. He hadn't lost his job yet. He was just scared of the possibility, and that's when it hit him. Most of life's suffering comes not from what is, but from what might be. So, he decided to stay present. He made tea, opened his window, and watched the sunrise spill across the rooftops. He told himself, whatever happens, I'll face it when it happens, not before. That single decision brought him more peace than years of analysis ever did. He realized that overthinking always lived in the past or future, never in the now. And the present moment, no matter how uncertain, was always manageable. Days passed, and eventually the news came. He would be let go. The old Arham would have spiraled, blaming himself, fearing the future. But now he simply sat with it. He allowed himself to feel sad, disappointed, and even scared. But he didn't let those emotions define him. He whispered to himself, I can feel this without becoming this. That night he walked to the same park again. The bench was empty, but the air felt familiar, calm, honest, grounding. He sat, watching the river flow, remembering what the old man once said. You can't stop the sea. You can only learn to swim, he smiled. Looks like it's time to swim again. Instead of rushing to fix his life, Aram did something different. He rested. He allowed space for nothingness, for uncertainty. Every morning he'd walk without his phone, listen to the rhythm of his steps and let silence teach him. And in that silence, something unexpected emerged, clarity. For years, he had been chasing security, but what he truly wanted was meaning. He wanted to do something that felt alive, not just safe. One evening, while journaling, he wrote, maybe losing something isn't always loss. Maybe it's a release. He started freelancing, small projects at first. And though it wasn't easy, he noticed something powerful. His mind wasn't attacking him anymore. He'd feel a worry rise, acknowledge it, then watch it fade, like a wave returning to the ocean. For the first time in his life, Aram wasn't fighting his thoughts. He was listening to them without attachment. And that changed everything. Weeks later, while working in a small cafe, he saw a young woman nearby, visibly anxious. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through her phone, whispering, "What if it all goes wrong?" Arham recognized that look. He'd lived it. He hesitated for a moment, then gently said, "I used to live in that storm too." She looked up, confused. "What storm?" "The one in your head," he smiled softly. "The one that convinces you that thinking more will make it all better." She frowned. "So how do you stop it?" "You don't?" he said. You just stop feeding it? Her eyes softened, and he could see the exact same flicker of realization he'd once felt in front of that old man. It was in that moment that Arham understood something deeper. Healing isn't about escaping pain. It's about passing the torch. When you share what you've learned, your wounds start becoming wisdom. That evening he walked home under a golden sunset. Every step felt like an act of gratitude, not for what he had, but for what he'd let go of. He realized that peace had never been about fixing the world outside. It had always been about making peace with the one inside. A few days later, he got a call from his old workplace, not to rehire him, but to thank him. They told him how calmly and gracefully he handled everything, how his attitude had inspired others during the layoffs. He smiled quietly. That's what peace does, he thought. It doesn't change what happens. It changes how you meet it. That night he sat by his window, the same place where his overthinking once controlled him. But now the silence felt like home. He wrote one last line in his journal. Maybe the mind was never my enemy. Maybe it was just a scared child asking to be understood. He closed the notebook, exhaled, and smiled. It wasn't the end of his story, just a new beginning. Because when you stop fighting your thoughts, life stops fighting you. And in that surrender, real strength is born. Arham leaned back, watching the stars. The same mind that once trapped him was now a quiet friend. The same world that once overwhelmed him now felt gentle, alive, and full of meaning. Peace, he finally understood, isn't found in the absence of storms, but in the art of standing still within them. Months passed. Seasons changed. The noise that once lived in Arham's head had grown quiet, not because life got easier, but because he stopped fighting what he couldn't control. He was learning to live, not just think about living. Every morning began with stillness. No rush, no phone, no need to prove anything. He'd make tea, breathe deeply, and whisper to himself, "Whatever today brings, I'll meet it with peace." It wasn't perfection. Some days, the old storm returned. But even when it did, Arham no longer drowned in it. He'd smile and say, "Ah, here you are again," and gently return his focus to the present moment. Because now he understood. Peace isn't a permanent state. It's a daily practice, a choice you make every time your mind tries to pull you away from now. One evening, he went back to that same park, the place where his healing had quietly begun. The air smelled of rain, and the river moved lazily under a soft orange sky. This time, he found the old man again, sitting on the same bench, still feeding birds. The old man looked up and smiled. "You look lighter," he said. Arham laughed. "Maybe because I finally stopped carrying my thoughts around." The man nodded knowingly. "And how did that happen?" Arham paused, looking at the sky. "I stopped trying to win against my mind. I started listening to it with kindness." The old man's eyes softened. "That's the secret, my boy. Peace doesn't come from control. It comes from compassion. Once you stop fighting yourself, the world stops fighting you too." They sat quietly for a long while, listening to the rustling trees and the hum of distant traffic. It wasn't silence, it was something deeper. A living, breathing quiet full of presence. Finally, Aram asked, "Do the thoughts ever go away completely?" The old man chuckled. "No, they don't, but their voice changes. They stop shouting fear and start whispering truth." Aram smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. He realized the mind wasn't something to silence. It was something to understand, to hold gently like a child afraid of the dark. For years, he had tried to think his way out of fear. Now he simply let fear be, without labeling it, without judgment. And each time he did, it faded on its own, like mist in morning light. That day marked a quiet turning point. Not a dramatic moment, but a deep inner shift. He didn't feel the need to fix himself anymore. He finally accepted that he was already whole, just hidden under layers of noise and doubt. Weeks later, Arham began mentoring young people online, not as a guru, not as a teacher, but as a fellow traveler. He shared stories, small practices, and simple truths. How breathing could anchor you. How writing could free you. How silence wasn't emptiness. It was presence. He told them, "Your thoughts are not your enemy. They're just signals. Learn to listen without obeying." People began writing to him, thanking him for helping them see what they'd been running from. And every time he read their messages, Arham smiled and whispered, "I guess that's how healing works." Quietly from one heart to another. One night he revisited his old journals, page after page of tangled fears, overanalyzed moments, and late-night battles with his thoughts. He could barely recognize the person who wrote them. But instead of shame, he felt gratitude, because without those nights he would never have found his mornings. He tore out one page, the very first entry that said, "Why can't I stop thinking?" He read it one last time, then folded it gently and placed it inside a small box labeled Lessons. Not to forget, but to remember how far he'd come. Standing by the window, the city lights below shimmered like tiny stars. He whispered, "I used to think peace meant quiet. Now I know peace means being okay, even when it's not quiet." He closed his eyes and breathed, a slow, grateful breath. His thoughts came and went, just like the wind brushing past the curtains. And he smiled because this time he wasn't afraid of them. The truth is, we all have an Aram inside us. The part that worries too much, that replays conversations, that tries to solve life before it happens. We mistake thinking for preparation and control for safety. But real peace begins when we stop trying to control everything and start trusting that we can handle anything. Because peace isn't something you find at the end of your thoughts. It's something that begins when you finally stop chasing them. So next time your mind starts running wild, pause for a moment. Take a breath, feel the weight of the present, and remind yourself, I can't control everything that happens, but I can choose how peacefully I walk through it. Aram's story isn't about escaping overthinking. It's about transforming your relationship with it. It's about remembering that your thoughts are weather and you are the sky, vast, still, unshaken, and maybe that's the greatest wisdom of all. You don't find peace by changing your life. You find peace by changing how you meet life. Final quote: peace isn't the silence of the mind, it's the gentle strength to stay calm inside its noise.